means they are either looking for their next opportunity and not really doing much other than the bare minimum to stay employed where they're working at, or they are almost to the point of disruptive where they're doing less than they need to do to keep their positions. And what I'm finding is there are a number of companies that are choosing to keep people on who are actively disengaged out of fear of letting them go and not having anyone to fulfill that position. And I can completely understand that because we already have a workforce that is being stressed and taxed by doing more than they could or they should because of the lack of people they have on staff. So we burden them more, which then increases the stress and burns them out even quicker. And we really have to find ways to address that. And one of the key ways I'm going to talk about here is related to leadership. So the problem often is in companies, employees are treated as widgets. And this, again, has been true pretty much since the beginning of time. Employees are seen as an expense item on the P&L. They are not seen as an asset. When changes happen in the marketplace, markets go up, go down, we kind of add or subtract people as needed. And while that is good for the bottom line, people see that, well, my job isn't secure here because the moment there's a dip in the market, I'm out the door. I'm given a box and pack up my stuff and I go. The other thing we're seeing is change is slow. And what I mean by that is everyone I talk to wants to make a direct impact on things like culture, leadership, communication, accountability immediately. And while we can take those steps instantly, making those steps work or making things stick takes much more time than that. We've all heard the phrase, it takes 3 weeks to build a habit. And while I believe that's partially true, it's not completely accurate. It takes much longer to really make that habit something that is part of who we are. And anywhere from 6 months to a year is really what it takes to get that to be ingrained, to be something that you do on a regular basis and not have to consciously think about. But everyone's looking at that 3-week window, trying to make those changes happen in 3 weeks. Now, we've also heard the flavor of the month as being a common term that's used in business. Flavor of the month simply means, well, the boss is trying something new, and in 4 weeks, we'll just go back to doing the same things we were doing before. And that's really what that's all about, is it takes 30 days and the boss is back to his old habits, which means we can go back to our old habits. That's part of the problem here is we really need to look at change as more of a continuous growth item and something that takes much longer than we expect. And we need to work at that. Our vision is inconsistent. So vision defines the direction the company's going. It provides kind of that mark for us to target for that growth and what we need to do to get there at a very high level. And often employees see a disconnect between what companies say they're going to do and what they actually do. And this is not only true with visions, but it's also true with the values. Purpose. Many businesses lack purpose, and we have a generation or two of people who are looking for something more than a job, more than punching the clock. Now, that isn't true with everybody. Some people are just happy making money and getting a paycheck. However, many people really want there to be something more. And part of that something more is an opportunity for growth within the position that they're in and growth towards other opportunities in the future. And if they're not seeing that purpose or seeing that growth, they're going to leave. Next is no future. And that kind of ties back into the no purpose part, where if they don't see a future and where they're going, it's very easy for them to look elsewhere to figure out how they're going to get there. Now, in many cases, maybe they don't even know their own path to growth or to success. But if there isn't a leader there guiding and coaching and mentoring them and showing them where the other opportunities are at in your company, it's going to be very quick for them to leave. And many leaders just don't take the time to do this. They're kind of stuck in the old mentality of, I'm just going to put my head down and do the work. I expect my employees to do the same. I don't give any feedback unless that feedback is needed. And 90% of the time that feedback is negative. So that's another thing we need to look at is how are we giving feedback to the people that are working for us? And is that feedback actually leading to wanting them to leave? And as hard as it may be, I see a lot of leaders who don't take the time to praise for good work because they believe that if somebody is doing their job, why should they get praise for doing the bare minimum? Well, I'll get into a little bit more of why that might be a challenge later on. First of all, let's talk about what employees want. Employees definitely want more, and they're in a position to ask for it. There's fewer people, it's a seller's market. You really have to look at what you're providing your staff to help them grow and decide if they're going to stay with you or if they're going to go somewhere else. Number one is they need to see opportunity. If they're being plugged into a position and there is no sign anywhere that they're going to move out of that position anytime in the near future, high probability they're not going to stick around too long. They're going to get what they can out of that job, which will then lead to a pay increase or a better title somewhere else. And if you want them to stay, they've got to see where there's an opportunity to grow in your business versus somewhere else. Coaching's important. I brought this up earlier. We tend to have leaders who don't spend a lot of time coaching their people. It's pretty much plug them into a job, let them go. If they're successful, great. If they're not, I'm going to spend time pointing out the problems and then trying to get them on track. And that's really difficult if you are not spending the time coaching and nurturing when we aren't in those crisis situations or when we aren't experiencing problems, because ultimately we all need some guidance on where to go. We need to get some direction. We need to be provided with some input. And ideally, it's not only the things that are going wrong, it's also what is going right. What am I doing well? Where can I improve? Where do you see my strengths? How can I use those strengths to grow in my position? That also leads to recognition. As I mentioned earlier, we're not real good at praising people when they're doing well. We're good at criticizing people when they're doing poorly. Well, if all the information you're getting is negative feedback, that leads to negative outcomes. Eventually, people will get sick of that and they'll go somewhere else. They'll see the grass is greener on the other side and they might leave. Unfortunately, though, is what we're seeing is people are jumping to a different job that probably doesn't have any better of a situation than they're currently in. So part of it is you have to break that habit. And that relies on support. It takes support of the leader of the team, of the people. It takes support of upper management. It takes support of the owner or CEO. You really have to spend your time doing what you need to do to coach the people that you have into doing better work and ultimately showing them the path to success is with you. It's also about creating that culture. We've heard a lot of talk about workplace culture. And as you probably know, if you buy a kegerator and a foosball table, that doesn't mean it's going to make your people happier. For whatever reason, 10 years ago, we were sold on this idea that, it's going to be cool and hip and we're going to do all these fun things in the workplace environment, but nothing really changed. You're still in the same place you were before. So while the kegerators might be nice, while the foosball table or the pool table or whatever you have might be nice, it's not leading to employee retention. So to me, that's wasted time and wasted effort in something that isn't going to lead to a positive result for your business. Focus on the greater good. As I said, employees are looking for purpose. They're looking for something greater. What difference or what changes are you making in the world? How are you differentiating yourself? We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide or two. We really have to look at what we're doing and how we're making our world a better place in the eyes of not only ourselves, but our employees as well. So what gets you in the game? And these are just kind of the non-negotiables that I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but really insist that you do have to have as part of this whole process. And first of all, you have to be competitive as far as wages go. I don't know of any companies that aren't trying to be competitive. It's definitely harder when you're a smaller organization. You have limited resources that you can work out for pay wages, but you do have to be somewhere in the ballpark of where it is reasonable for that person to look at that position and, given their experience, say, yeah, that pays me enough for what I need there. Also have to look at benefits. Benefits need to be good or need to provide something that's going to attract people in. If you provide no benefits, we've got to figure out a different way to do that. Health insurance is critical for some people, families, people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s are going to be more concerned about health insurance than people who are in their 20s. Time off is going to be important. Flexibility. So that leads to the next point. Flexibility is important when it's possible. Now, Sometimes it's not as possible. For example, retail, restaurant, in some cases manufacturing, there's very specific times and ways that people can do their job. A wait server can't call in on the day that they're working and expect the boss is going to be happy about that, because ultimately that person is needed in order to uh, to do the work and help the customers that are coming in the door. In those white collar office positions, there tends to be more flexibility, and we're seeing again a lot of hybrid work environments. Personally, I'm looking at companies that are doing hybrid as being more successful than companies are going full virtual. Unless you have the culture that supports that and you have the structure to keep the team together, it's very difficult to do a fully virtual environment. Everyone's kind of working on their own. And we've also seen that for some people, that just doesn't work out. That actually leads to greater issues because they need that human connection. And we learned at the beginning of the pandemic that people early on were more productive when they stayed at home because less time was spent traveling back and forth to work, less time was spent getting organized once they got to the office, and then of course the plethora of meetings that tends to go on in most companies that impacts everything as well. But if there's ways that we can be more flexible and we can optimize our time better, that's another thing that employee and team members are looking at. And back to that commitment for a cause. If there's something you can do in your business to show you're working towards a greater good, even if it's for your industry, that can make a huge difference. So it's time to lead. There's a number of things that we can't control, such as the marketplace. Wages, we have some level of impact on, but again, based on the size of your organization, you might be limited to how much you can pay. Same with benefits. Benefits can be rather expensive, and we got to be realistic about what we can provide on an economic scale. But at the same point, there's a lot of flexibility we can provide on a cultural scale. And this is where leadership really needs to change. And this again should be nothing new to anyone on the call or anyone who's researching this. Leadership's very important, but leadership is the one thing that is lacking in most organizations because that affects everything from the vision to the communication to the implementation to the consistency to the follow-up and accountability. And if all those things are lacking, it's going to really impact your ability to grow your bottom line and also keep the people who are the hard workers. Because here's what happens. You have your high performers, and we all rely on the high performers to do their job. Well, what happens when that high performer is one of only a few people around and there's a bunch of low performers around them? Well, the high performer tends to get a lot more of the work because we know they'll get the job done. And at some point, there's always going to be a breaking point. The saying is, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Well, that's true until that busy person reaches the point where they can take on no more work and they're looking at the people around them who aren't doing as much and going, well, I'm getting paid about the same as what they are. Why am I still here when my services can be valued somewhere else? And maybe I get myself in a team with other hardworking individuals who are going to do the job. This is why it becomes very critical for leadership to hold people accountable and make sure that the job is being completed by the people that need to complete that job. Now, most of the time, what I see people doing is leaders step into more of a manager role. And management is different than leadership. Management is about tasks and things, where leadership is about people. So we need to really look at how we do that. First comes to the vision. Next is the direction, as quickly followed up by alignment and support, and then that commitment to consistency. And the last one's probably just as important or more important than all the other ones combined. So vision. Not going to spend a lot of time here because most people have built a vision statement through various strategic planning sessions. If you're in any sort of organization, you've probably done one at least in the last 5 years. But our vision is really what provides us the goals that we're going to work towards. The best example of a vision statement that I think most people are aware of is when Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon within the decade. And that was in the 60s. That is probably the clearest, most concise vision statement I've heard from any company anywhere, and it came from our president at the time. So we have to look at kind of the same concept when we're building a vision. Is there has to be this high level view our worldview of our business and where we see that business going. And then that leads next to how we're going to get there. So it has to be emotionally charged. It has to excite people. It has to define what that purpose is going to be. And it also goes to explain how we are different. Because if it's just going to be a job, any job will do as long as it provides the right compensation. And that's why a lot of people leave is they don't see any opportunity where they're at. They don't see any purpose. They don't see any vision. They're then going to go somewhere else where that opportunity exists. And if that's going to be the case, now you're competing on economics. You're going to lose out to the company that can pay more money or that can provide more benefits. People want to hang on to something that's a greater good. They are emotionally connected to the job that they're doing. They're more than likely going to stick around at least a little bit longer. And we've just got to realize that people are eventually going to leave, but the more we can do to keep them there, the better we're going to be. And that leads to direction. And in my mind, direction is the compass. It's pointing where we're going and it's giving us a roadmap of how to get there. So if you think about it, I'm here in Wisconsin. If I was going to go to LA, I'd at least need to know which direction to point my car and which roads to go on and ultimately how to get there. I can't see LA from my home. I can look out the door. I can kind of guess which direction I need to go. But at the same point, it's a vision. It's tied to that vision because while we can't see where LA is, we can build the roadmap on how to get there. And that's what we are often missing. So where a vision is the why we do what we do, the direction provides the how we're going to get there. That's accompanied by alignment. And as an organization, we need alignment with everything that we are doing. So vision, direction, now we need to make sure everything's going to keep us on the highway. And that's really where values come in. Values are what we will do and what we won't do. And they're guidance for us on how we perform our business. They're the guideposts on a highway. I've used this example a lot. So the vision is the destination. The direction is how we're going to get there. That's the roads. And if you think of a multi-lane highway, there's lines on the roads that kind of keep us in check. We need those lines to be flexible enough that we can move out of the way of obstacles and around them. But we also need guidance on the side of the road so we don't go off into the ditch. Because if you go into the ditch, unless you have a very good off-road vehicle, it's probably not going to go very well. So we need to make sure we are doing these things. We need to define that purpose, and then we need to honor it religiously. And what I mean by that is many companies set their values, but they don't live by their values. In fact, I've walked into organizations that tout their values, and I ask the leaders what they are, and they give me a blank stare because outside of creating them at a strategic planning session or at a different session, they've never actually done anything to integrate them into everything from coaching to counseling to disciplining to celebrating. None of it is there. And when we miss those values, we miss the emotional part of what connects those people to their jobs. And also, if they see a misalignment of those values, where we say one thing, we do another, that discredits us as leaders, as a company, and people will look at that and then they have to decide if they want to be part of an organization like that. And many people will opt out. This is where the support comes in. Support of the vision, mission, and values really is provided by the leadership team. And many leaders get stuck in doing the job, not coaching others to do the job. Number one excuse I often hear, I can do this faster. I can do this in 5 minutes where it takes me an hour to teach somebody else. And it's going to take me multiple times to get that person to be even 80% of my productivity. Well, if that's the case, that 80% of your productivity frees you up to do other things. And again, your most important thing is coaching people to be more successful as a leader. You need to spend more time doing that. If you're not spending your time coaching your people as a leader, then they're going to leave or they're going to do things that are going to damage the company from a sales side, from a profitability side, or they're just going to wander aimlessly in the ocean like a rudderless ship. So we really need to make sure we are putting people in a position to be successful. As part of that, we need to put our leaders in a position where they're being successful, where they're spending most of their time guiding their employees to achieving the goals that we've set for them. As I mentioned, most leaders manage so they get stuck in the things and the tasks. And that's what makes it really hard, is when we're so task focused and we're focused on getting the job done, we miss the bigger picture. And it's very hard to get leaders to step back, especially now because we're already, in many cases, understaffed, which is why leaders tend to be more hands-on. They've always been hands-on in many ways, and that's a goal that many people tout here, especially in the Midwest. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty and get in there. Well, there's a certain point where you've got to allow other people to take on those roles and those functions and do those jobs, and you need to step back and coach those people to be more successful. Consistency is a big part of this. As I've kind of alluded to throughout the previous slides, we often lack consistency in what we do. The image here is automotive plant where cars are going down the assembly line. When you buy a vehicle, you expect it to work, you expect it to deliver on its promise, you expect it to function regardless if you bought the first vehicle produced or the last vehicle produced of that particular brand. And we're looking for the same thing in the leadership style. And consistency in some ways is robotic. In other words, you have to follow similar steps all the way through to get similar results. But you also need that flexibility because people are unique. Everyone is a little bit different. A good leader knows how to adjust their style to match the person they're communicating with so they get better outcomes. They also recognize that not everyone has the same strength in the same areas. A good leader knows how to pull together teams and get them to work together so there's more synergy in function versus conflict or disruption. Because let's face it, if you have two highly talented people that are both talented in the same areas, you brought them together, it doesn't always lead to a better outcome. In fact, it leads to greater conflict because each side sees what they're doing and they're all fighting for that success in their actions and in what they can deliver on. And they fail to see where they need help elsewhere. So a well-rounded team brings in different behavior sets, different types of personalities, different talents that all mesh and work together like pieces of a puzzle. We also have to focus on performance. And that is really something I've seen slip a lot lately out of fear of losing people. The assumption is if we hold people accountable and to task and expect them to perform, they're going to get tired and go somewhere else. Now, that might be true in some cases, but my experience is people are looking for those opportunities where they can excel. They're looking for the right challenge. They're looking for something that in their mind provides them a level of satisfaction or elation that they're probably not getting. So if you're looking at creating paper pushers or putting people on a line where they see no other way out than to leave, they're going to do that. But if you focus on performance, if you use that performance as a guidance and tied it to the vision, the values, the purpose, the mission, the direction, all those things play into keeping that person excited and seeing an opportunity. But then you have to deliver on it. There has to be equal expectations for everybody. And what we often see is leaders spend a vast majority of their time working with their worst employees and a very minimal amount of time working with their best employees. We almost need to flip the script on that. If you have poor performers, you need to find ways to either get them to be high performers and help out the team, or you need to free up their future, find somebody else to replace them. If you have high performers, those are the ones you need to coach to do better and figure out where they're struggling or where they're stressing. So that way we can balance out the workflow. And that's really what it comes down to, is if you're not setting equal expectations for everybody, you're setting higher expectations for your high performers and you're letting the low performers slip, your high performers are soon going to walk out the door. And that is what I often see and what I often hear from leaders that say they're experiencing high turnover is their good people are getting burnt out because the poor people aren't picking up their slack. And we really need to focus on how we're being very consistent and holding people to the same level of expectations. And we need to stick to outcomes. Leaders talk about tasks and almost at a microscopic level sometimes. where really the job of the leader is to focus on the outcomes or the expectations. Set what you want, set those measures, set those timelines, follow through, hold accountability. Also, communicate regularly. How many times have you seen your boss walk into an office, shut the door, and not really communicate with anybody else unless it's absolutely necessary? When is it absolutely necessary? Well, it's absolutely necessary when something's going wrong. So, again, there's no praise, there's no celebration, there's no follow up. If we're not building those into the equation, it's going to be very hard to keep people connected. And communication, regular communication, is extremely helpful because it allows you to be proactive on situations that could potentially slow you down, cost you money, and cause greater problems. We tend to be very reactionary. We wait till something happens and then we race in to correct it. And I believe that there are some leaders that actually enjoy that because it gives them a sense of purpose. Instead of the purpose being how to prevent problems, the purpose becomes how to solve the problems. And we're very used to that, especially when we haven't been given a lot of training or coaching to really what it takes to be a good leader. So here we're in a situation where, an employee might be underperforming, maybe the leader is underperforming on top of it, and it just compounds the whole issue, which is why consistency becomes so important. Consistency is also critical because as you make change happen, if you are not consistent with the process, it's very easy to lose track of how you're going to follow through and get there. Most people try things. After a couple of weeks, it gets hard. It's not a straight line curve or not a straight line growth pattern. It is actually more of a roller coaster. And we really need to be focused on the bigger picture of what it takes to stay on track. And it's hard to stay on track when it seems like everything is failing and everything is going wrong. And what I'll tell people is you need to get through that part. You need to grow past where the dip in the roller coaster hits and it feels like nothing's working at all and stay on track. You might need to pivot slightly. Sometimes we need to adjust, but that doesn't mean we need to step back or we need to stop altogether. Many times it's that pushing forward because our brains are learning new activities and it's going against what we consider our normal to be. Whether it's working out, whether it's learning a new task, we all hit those times where we get frustrated, we get tired, it doesn't seem to work, and we need to stay on course and stick with that. So, what needs to change? Go back to the communication. Strong communication is the first thing that I see that leaders really need to focus on. They need to stay connected to their vision, their direction, their values, and they need to tie that into everything that each team member is doing. It really explains that why and explains what's important about the activities you're asking those employees to do. It also helps from a creativity side because when we need to solve problems, if they understand what's going to guide them to a correct solution, they can be very helpful in helping figure out how to fix what's not working. Employees need a path to growth. If you're not going to talk to them from the point of when they're hired, or more importantly, you talk to them about when they're hired, but then nothing's ever done following up with that, that is going to create a big problem. And many times there's this huge excitement, we're going to hire you and you're going to have all these opportunities, and then you get plugged into a seat, and that's the end of it. I remember I took a position many years ago and I was excited about the position. I talked to my boss and I said, this is where I want to be in a couple of years. And she said, oh, that's never going to happen. It takes easily 20 plus years to get in a position like that. And you're just not going to get there. Well, imagine how motivating that was. Was I going to do better because of that? Was I going to put forth the effort if my boss was going to work on my behalf, be my cheerleader, celebrate me, and do what they need to do to give me the skills to fulfill that position? No, I now look at it as a position where I'm just going to put my head down, do the work until maybe something better comes along or until someone better comes along that can guide me there. We also need to look at building on strengths. Not everyone has the same set of strengths. We need to find what are unique strengths of each individual and be able to learn from those strengths and help them apply those strengths in a way that's going to help them grow. We also need to find others who will complement their weaknesses. And that is true of ourselves as leaders. There are some things that I do very well. There are other things that I really don't do that well. Well, we need to make changes to the people that we surround ourselves with to cover for those gaps that we have. It will help make us more successful. It will help make them more successful. It is also more of a synergistic approach to individual growth. And you'll see people happier. They'll be more elated with their position and more likely to stick around longer. It's not that everyone's going to leave in 4 years, but they will leave in 4 years if you don't create an environment where they want to stay, and they might leave even sooner. So, where's that positive reinforcement? How often does that happen? How often do you celebrate success? What I find is many people, many leaders only talk to their employees when something's wrong. In fact, I've had several discussions with the client lately where I've told them when they're trying to make a change, praise the change when it happens. And they'll say, well, that's just an expectation of their job. That's what they should be doing anyway. Why am I rewarding them for doing something they should be doing as part of their job? And what I tell people is if you're not taking the effort to recognize when somebody's doing something right, rewarding that positive behavior, what you're going to get is more negative behavior. Because guess what gets the attention? When you do something wrong, the boss is on your doorstep knocking and saying, you need to improve this. Well, that provides, again, some connection or some feedback, but it's not the right type of feedback. And as we struggle right now, about 90% of the feedback we receive through external sources is negative. Well, all you're doing is pushing them down further. And if they're not happy or satisfied with where they're working, they're going to go somewhere else. So we really need to look at how we're building a positive reinforcement plan, how we're communicating successes, no matter how small, how we're recognizing people for doing their job correctly, and how we're giving them feedback and providing substance to their growth. So we need to value that education, flexibility, accountability, positivity, and consistency. That all becomes part of the equation and ultimately builds the culture that we're talking about. If we aren't doing that, it's going to be difficult for us to maintain the workforce that we have. And keep in mind, everyone right now has an opportunity to go somewhere else because everyone's hurting for labor. But who's going to have the greatest opportunity and who sees the greatest opportunity if they leave? Your high performers, because they know if they go somewhere else, they can make more money, they can get more benefits, they can potentially get some other people around them who are also going to share in their work efforts and take less of that burden and stress on themselves. Now, there are many people that are very loyal and they're yearning for some of this from their leadership team. They want to stay. So if you're making efforts, this is really going to be helpful. If you're not following through on these steps, it's going to be very difficult. So what we learned today? Well, retention takes leadership. It's very important. Consistency is critical. Staying on path, staying on target, holding the line, doing what you need to do to make sure that the feedback and outcomes are being very consistent across the board for everybody. And where those inconsistencies happen, we need to then bring in balance in some way, shape, or form, because consistency is also about adjusting and adjusting in a way that gets people back on track. Uniqueness differentiates. So what makes you unique? What makes your culture unique? Where is your sense of purpose? How is that working for you? Those are all important issues that need to be addressed. And if we're not communicating that uniqueness, we're not celebrating that purpose, that vision, there's really nothing connecting the person to the job except for the income. And if the income's the only thing, there's plenty of other places out there right now that are going to pay. Values matter. And alignment of those values matter even more. If we're not consistent in our alignment, if we're saying one thing, doing another, people will realize that. And they're not going to put forth the same effort if they're promised one thing and they deliver another, or they see the company doing one thing and delivering another. Many people will walk from that. They're going to look for companies that have strong values, align those values, communicate those values often, and hold people accountable to them. Leadership needs to develop so that people want to stay. And if you look at the stats, in most cases, the reason people leave their job is not because of pay, is because they lack support from the leadership team. They were not part of the equation when it came to good communication, follow through, coaching, mentoring. And we have two generations of people who have grown up in an environment where they received a lot of feedback in their youth. They received a lot of coaching. I mean, how many of you are soccer parents or basketball parents or baseball parents where these kids got used to getting a lot of feedback and now we're throwing them out to the wolves and saying, well, you figure it out. Well, we need to provide that constant communication, that constant coaching. We need to develop our leadership team so they stay. So opportunity, flexibility, guidance, and coaching are all necessary. At that point, I'm going to turn it over to questions. Hopefully you've brought some with you. My contact information, so you can reach me at danpaulsonletsgo.com. You can also call me at 608-467-0223 if there's anything I can do to help you. And at that point, I'm going to stop the show here. And let me bring this back up. Okay. All right, I'm back. Hopefully everyone is still around. Good. What questions do you have? Are there any questions? Any questions at all? Did I cover it pretty well? Let me I have a poll here. Let me publish this poll. So if you could answer the questions, and once we get some responses, I will be happy to show you the results. But what are you doing to retain your staff right now? So I put here increased wages, flexible work environment, relaxing accountability, because I've actually seen organizations that have expected less from people in order for them to stay. It's kind of like the inmates running the asylum. Better benefits, better culture. I'll leave this open for a couple, about a minute. While you're filling that out, let me. So Donna, so is there a listing of companies that believe and have in practice these leadership qualities? Very good question, Donna. I don't know if there's a specific listing. Some books out there that are definitely helpful are things like Good to Great, Built to Last. The Jim Collins books, I think, provide some good resources of companies that used to do that. Now, what's funny is most of the Good to Great companies fell off the wagon. For whatever reason, that book was a death knell for some companies. I'm happy to talk to you with some about maybe some organizations I know or that I can look up for you. Off the top of my head, I know of a few companies that I work with that have a pretty strong workplace culture, and the owner really focuses on that. If the company is very people focused instead of very process focused, I tend to see a much stronger workplace culture. This can be where manufacturing sometimes struggles because we have people that are stuck in making widgets or sitting kind of behind the scenes. But that isn't always true either. It really depends on that owner. If they value people, if a company values people as an asset, you'll see better results than if they are just treating them as a widget. Again, they're just part of the equipment. They're like a robot. They're there to do a job. They do the job and they move on. And there's still a lot of companies that unfortunately are kind of stuck in that mindset even after all this is going on. Bob Gross. Agree with the focus on the mission, vision, values. They are great and important. Thanks for the emphasis. Thank you, Bob. I also think we need to let underperformers go. Amen. There are so many companies that are afraid to let underperformers go. And the reason this happens is they don't have any backup. And what I tell my clients, and I harp on them constantly about this, because we only work on hiring when we have a need for people. Well, right now, everyone has a need for people, but you go back 5-10 years ago. One of the things I said is you need to build relationships with potential employees, and you need to kind of fill a little black book of people that you can reach out to if you have an opportunity and you believe they would be a good fit. Most of the time in traditional business environments, we're broadcasting a job opening. So we post on Indeed, Monster, any one of those workplace or those job posting sites. And what ends up happening is, we get what we get. Well, when you're building relationships, when you're networking, when you're treating it more like sales and marketing versus just a hiring position, an HR position, that's really where you get to pick from the cream of the crop. Because as you start building connections with people, you see how their values and skills align with your needs, and you're able to produce an opportunity that's going to be a best fit for not only that person but for your company. So really start thinking about what are you doing to build that little black book, or that sales funnel of employees, if you will, so that way you have a crop of people to pick from, instead of just waiting until you have a need and then going out and trying to fulfill that need, because it's very difficult right now. And many of you, if any of you are in HR, you realize that. So this is what will be helpful in the long term. And I encourage you, as hopefully we work out of this situation at some point in the future, that shouldn't stop you from looking for people to hire. And it shouldn't stop you from reaching out to people that you would want to connect with, because you believe at some point maybe they might be a good fit for you. You never know. I've found many people working in restaurants who turn out to be great fits for some of my clients. In fact, I'll tell this story. We were in a restaurant one time, and we were having dinner with one of my clients. Our wait person was extremely kind, great service, everything else. He asked her what she was there for. Turns out she was going to school. She was going to be graduating in a career which he had an exact opening for. He handed her his card, said, "We'd love to interview you. I like your attitude, your personality." Ended up hiring her, and she's still working there. And that was several years ago. Donna, I utilize performance review one-on-one meetings to find out where employees want to grow in the company, to get them there. I believe employees will do their best if in the position they love and have a passion for. 100% agree. And you're doing a lot of things right. The one-on-one meetings are important. Regular, consistent meetings with your staff. It could be once a month. It can be for 10 to 15 minutes. Just something to connect, to let them, give them opportunity to give feedback to you, and for you to give feedback to them. If we're not providing that regular and consistent communication, goes back again to that consistency, it's going to be very difficult for us to keep those people here and keep them happy, because then they're going to look elsewhere. And right now, if you look elsewhere, again, there's plenty of job openings, and there are people that probably have greater resources and can pay more than you can. Carl, thanks for posting here. We are working on coaching our leadership to follow your suggestions. Our people are not seeing the alignments and are leaving. High performers are leaving because low performers sit back on their heels. Exactly. Perfect way to point it out. I see this happen time and time again, and this was happening well before we were in a situation where we are right now, where we have such a low unemployment rate across the board. It really is a seller's market right now. And if your high performers keep getting dumped on, because this is what happens, we go to the people that we know will do the job and expect them to do more. And early on, they're very happy to do that. But at some point, they realize they're doing all the work, and they're sitting around and looking at everyone else going, why aren't these people picking up some of the slack? And why am I getting stuck with all the work? It's not seen as a reward anymore, because, again, they don't see their wages going up. They just see more work getting dumped on their plate. And there's basic economics these people understand, which is if I'm doing more and making the same, I'm actually making less. Small organization doesn't have a lot of opportunities for growth. There are different things you can do there, Carl. And we can probably talk about that further. If you're happy, I can talk to you about that offline. Feel free to reach out. Happy to do that. It is difficult for smaller organizations that don't have a good vertical ladder for people to climb up. But you're looking at things just from a positional standpoint or from a title standpoint. There might be greater opportunities to take on challenges in your organization for specific projects, for new initiatives, where you can put these people in charge and give them some opportunity for growth. ultimately people just don't want to get stuck in a job where they're going to be punching the clock and schlepping papers for 8 hours a day or more. In many cases right now it's for longer because, again, we're shorthanded. So there are different things you can do there. We can talk about, what might work there. Happy to discuss it with you. Let me close out this poll. Thank you all for responding. And now you should see the results. So, interesting. Increasing wages didn't get a single vote. I actually expected that to get more than I thought. Flexible work environment, we got 2 votes out of that. Relaxing accountability, nobody voted for that. Better benefits, we got 1 vote. Most people are looking to improve culture and workplace skills. So again, thank you all for participating in that. I think that's very important to recognize. And with that, I'm going to start wrapping it up. So does anyone else have any other questions or statements they would like to make? If not, I always say start on time, end on time. And I started a little bit late due to some technical difficulties. Thank you for sticking around. We're going to wrap up just a wee bit early here, which will give you some time maybe to catch up on a few emails or phone calls. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I've given you my contact information and look forward to talking to many of you soon. Have a great rest of your week and stay warm. Thanks again.